The stone gargoyles of Castle Drake watched in silent judgment as Liam Valerius crossed the threshold. The air was frigid, heavy with the scent of old marble and something metallic, the faint, ever-present odor of ancient blood. This was not a wedding, it was a surrender. Liam, dressed in the heavy black ceremonial suit of the Valerius Covenant, stopped before the altar. His heart hammered a human rhythm against the profound silence of the hall. He was the offering, the final link in a peace treaty forged centuries ago between mortals and the Von Drake Coven. He didn't look at the crowd of stoic, beautiful and terrifying faces that lined the pews. Their eyes, varying shades of gold and ruby, were fixed on him, assessing his worth as a sacrifice or perhaps a meal. Then she arrived. Seraphina Von Drake, Sarah, moved down the aisle like a whisper of midnight. Her wedding gown was a deep, unholy crimson, echoing the stained-glass windows of the castle's dilapidated chapel. It pooled around her feet, a river of velvet and fear. Her porcelain skin was a stark contrast to her raven-black hair, and her eyes, an unnerving shade of deep amethyst, never once met his. When she reached him, the elder, Lord Cayen Drake, took her hand, his expression a mixture of triumph and cold disdain. Cayen was a towering shadow, his presence radiating in ancient, absolute authority. "We are here to bear witness to the joining of the lines," Cayen's voice echoed, a deep, resonant rumble that seemed to shake the very foundations of the old castle. "The human, Liam Valerius, and the vampire, Seraphina Von Drake. This union binds the covenant of Asmer, ensuring peace and power for our houses." Liam felt the weight of history press down on him. This marriage was his family's duty, a desperate bid to keep the fragile truce from shattering. When it came time for the vows, Sarah's voice was barely a breath, devoid of all human warmth. "I take you, Liam Valerius, to fulfill the contract until the final darkness." Liam took her hand. Her skin was perfectly cold, like marble in winter. He squeezed it gently, a small, futile gesture of humanity. "I take you, Seraphina," he said, his voice clear and firm despite the tremor in his soul. "I take you in hope, and in the promise of all that a heart can give." He knew his words were met with silent ridicule by the vampire onlookers. Hope and heart were currency they did not value. Cayen signaled the end, ignoring the human tradition of a kiss. Liam turned to his new wife, prepared for the cold dismissal he knew would follow. "Seraphina," he whispered, finally meeting her eyes. They held a flicker of something he couldn't name, grief, maybe, or a profound, terrible shame. She didn't acknowledge his sentiment. Instead, she leaned in, her cold breath brushing his ear. Her voice was low, a dangerous, thrilling sound meant only for him. "Listen carefully, husband," she commanded. "This is the first and last vow I will make to you, and it is more binding than the covenant itself." Liam's heart sped up. This is it, he thought. The threat. The true terms of the bond. Her sharp canines were barely visible as she spoke, a fleeting glint of danger in the gloom. "I will not drink. Ever," she stressed the word, making it an oath. "And you will not offer. I am your bride in name, but you will never be my sustenance. Break this rule, and you will not only forfeit your life, but you will condemn your soul to the eternal hunger that resides in mine." She straightened up, her expression once again the beautiful, impassive mask of the ancient vampire. The words were a bitter taste in Liam's mouth, a sharp realization that his marriage was not just loveless, but a terrifying, permanent refusal of the blood bond that should have completed their union. He was married to a vampire who refused to be a vampire, and he had no idea why. The massive, four-poster bed in the Drake master chamber felt like an altar for sacrifice, not a marriage bed. Its canopy was thick velvet, absorbing all sound and light, making the room a vast, echoing cave. Liam Valerius lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The chill of the room wasn't just the castle's old stone, it was the persistent, supernatural cold radiating from his wife. Seraphina occupied the opposite side of the bed, perfectly still and silent, a portrait of lethal beauty carved from ice. She hadn't moved since they entered the room hours ago, and Liam knew she wouldn't stir until the sun had completely vanished below the horizon. Their first night as a married couple was a masterclass in emotional distance. The vow she had whispered, "I will not drink. Ever," hung in the air between them, thick as a shroud. It wasn't the rejection of a wife that stung Liam, but the absolute rejection of the bond itself. The covenant required the blood union. Sarah's refusal was an act of defiance and possibly treason against her own kind. Around midnight, a whisper of movement broke the silence. Sarah rose, her movements fluid and silent as smoke. She wore a simple dark silk robe, but even in that she looked impossibly regal. She walked to the high Gothic window overlooking the moonlit forest. "You should sleep, Liam." Her voice was low, careful, almost devoid of texture. "It's difficult to sleep when you've married the night itself," he replied, sitting up. She didn't turn. "I'm not interested in your romantic hyperbole. Sleep. You are mortal, you require rest. I require the night." Liam swung his legs over the side of the bed and walked over to her. The distance he kept was respectful, but deliberate. "Seraphina, why the vow? If the covenant means anything, we both know the blood union is necessary. Why marry me only to defy the very terms of our agreement?" Finally she turned. Her face, bathed in the pale moonlight filtering through the cracked stained glass, was unreadable, but Liam caught a fleeting hardness in her amethyst eyes. "The terms of the covenant are ancient and complex, human," she stated, her tone cold. "Do not presume to understand them. My refusal is a necessary component of my duty, one that outweighs your simple mortal desire for an easy path." "You think I want an easy path?" Liam scoffed, the frustration finally bubbling up. "My life, my bloodline, my future, I've laid it all at your feet for this peace. All I ask is to understand the rules you've just rewritten." She took a sharp step back, a sudden movement that startled him. Her nostrils flared almost imperceptibly, and her gaze dropped, not to his eyes but to his neck. It was a terrifying, instinctive reaction that lasted less than a second, but it spoke volumes. "The rules are clear, husband," she whispered, her voice tightening with a strain that wasn't just anger. "You will live. That is my only rule." Before he could respond, she was gone, a blur of movement through the door, leaving only the lingering, cold air behind. The next morning, Liam was summoned to the grand, oppressive study of Lord Cayen Drake. Cayen sat behind a massive, dark oak desk, the very picture of ancient, tyrannical power. He did not invite Liam to sit. "The peace is fragile, Valerius," Cayen began, his eyes fixed on Liam with unnerving intensity. "The covenant's magic requires nourishment. It requires the consummation of the blood union. My wife has made it clear that she is not ready for that step," Liam answered carefully. He hated having to justify his wife's actions to her intimidating uncle. Cayen leaned forward, a predatory smile touching his lips. "Perhaps she is merely waiting for the proper incentive." He tapped his long, skeletal fingers on the desk. "Or perhaps the human blood is weak. The covenant demands power, not fragility. It will not tolerate a failure of duty, Valerius. If Seraphina does not claim the bond soon, the other houses will sense the imbalance. And when they do, the peace will not merely break, it will shatter, taking the Valerius line with it." Cayen's words were a cold, calculated threat. He was not just pressuring Sarah. He was subtly shifting the blame onto Liam. Later that day, a familiar human voice broke the castle's suffocating atmosphere. "Liam. Good gods, this place smells like old pennies and regret." Elara, Liam's cousin and confidant, burst into the drawing room. She was a whirlwind of energy and vibrant color against the castle's muted tones. "Elara, what are you doing here?" Liam asked, relieved but worried. "Duty," she said, her smile fading. She lowered her voice. "My mother sent me. The Valerius family knows you're swimming with sharks. We've been reviewing the ancient texts, the ones the Drakes don't want anyone to see." She pulled a brittle leather-bound scroll from her satchel. "The covenant is a trap, Liam. It doesn't just ensure peace, it's a ritual to trap a specific power. The blood union with Seraphina is meant to activate something inside you, something the Drakes desperately need for their survival." "What kind of power?" Liam whispered. Elara's eyes were wide with genuine fear. "The scroll is fragmented, but the last line is clear. When the immortal drinks the Valerius heart, the mortal's sacrifice becomes the binding key, and her hunger shall never again be quenched." Liam's blood ran cold. Her hunger shall never again be quenched. Was that why Sarah refused? Not because she was afraid of killing him, but because the ritual would unleash an unstoppable, eternal bloodlust that she couldn't control? Dusk descended again. Liam was alone in the library, trying to reconcile Elara's terrifying discovery with his wife's distant sadness. He heard a noise, a barely audible gasping choke from a dark corner of the room. He found Seraphina huddled by a large antique globe, her body shaking. There was a thin, dark line of blood trailing down her wrist. She must have cut herself accidentally while moving some of the room's clutter. Her eyes were squeezed shut, her knuckles white as she pressed her injured wrist tightly against the stone wall. She was trying to contain the scent of her own blood. The struggle was agonizingly visible. "Sarah." Liam rushed forward, forgetting all caution. "Stay back," she hissed, a low, guttural sound, her perfect face twisted in a silent battle. "Do not approach me." He stopped short. He could see the venom in her eyes, the raw, ancient hunger fighting the iron will of the woman he married. It was the face of a wild beast, beautiful but deadly. "Is this it, Sarah?" Liam asked softly, the fear replaced by a crushing wave of pity and realization. "Is this the curse? You won't drink my blood because you know if you break you can never stop." Her eyes snapped open, a flash of pain replacing the hunger. He had touched the core of her secret. The silent hunger was not a choice, it was a prison she had built for herself, and he was the one temptation that could set the monster free. The week following their muted wedding was a period of fragile, deceptive peace. But the silence wasn't healing, it was simply the calm before the storm. Liam knew Lord Cayen's threats were not empty, and Alara's warning about the binding key resonated like a death knell in his mind. Seraphina continued her nocturnal routine, leaving the master chamber the moment the last sliver of sun vanished, and returning just before dawn. Liam, however, noticed a subtle shift. Her returns were often accompanied by a faint, earthy scent and the slightest tremor in her hands, signs of activity, perhaps of silent patrols. One Tuesday night, the deceptive peace shattered. Liam was in the Valerius wing of Castle Drake, reviewing old family ledgers, trying to find any mention of the binding key Alara had referenced. He was alone and in the vast, vampire-controlled fortress. That was a lethal mistake. The massive oak doors of the archive burst open with a crash, the wood splintering inward. Two figures, bulkier and less refined than the Drake Coven, stood in the frame. Their eyes glowed as sickly, almost orange-yellow, Volkov clan enforcers, known for their brute force and disdain for the Drake's soft covenant with mortals. "The Keeper of the Blood," one sneered, his voice a gravelly echo. "Lord Cayen keeps him well fed. We came to collect the price of the fragile peace, human." Liam, a man of ledgers and diplomacy not combat, knew he was outmatched. He grabbed the only weapon available, a heavy brass candlestick, and stood his ground. "The Covenant protects me," Liam stated, trying to sound authoritative. The second enforcer laughed, a dry, rasping sound. "The Covenant is failing, mortal. The bride refuses the drink. The spell is starving. We're here to either force the bond or end the lineage." Before Liam could react, the first vampire was on him, moving with impossible speed. Liam swung the candlestick, which shattered harmlessly against the vampire's granite-hard forearm. A crushing grip closed around Liam's throat, lifting him clear off the floor. His lungs burned. Just as the world began to dim and the vampire raised a clawed hand for the final blow, a shadow, faster and far more elegant than the Volkov thugs, flashed into the room. It was Seraphina. She moved with the devastating precision of a trained killer. She didn't use fangs or claws, she used ancient, refined technique. Her hands swept out, not cutting, but striking a specific nerve cluster on the first vampire's neck. The large enforcer dropped Liam and staggered back, momentarily paralyzed. "You trespass on my territory." Seraphina's voice was a low, dangerous growl, her control momentarily lost to pure territorial rage. Her eyes, usually cold amethyst, now glowed with an internal, terrifying energy. The second Volkov immediately attacked her, not foolishly but with a desperate ferocity. Sarah met him head-on, their movements becoming a blur. Liam, coughing and scrambling for air, watched the deadly ballet. In the melee, the second Volkov managed to land a heavy kick, sending Sarah crashing back against a precarious shelf of ancient, heavy tomes. She hit the wall hard, and a large, stone bust of an ancient Valerius ancestor toppled. Instinct overriding fear, Liam dove forward. He shoved Sarah just as the bust crashed down, shattering on the floor where her head had been moments before. For a terrifying split second, as Liam held her, their bodies pressed together, Sarah's perfect composure broke. Her eyes locked onto his, wide, startled and undeniably grateful. The proximity, the scent of his panicked sweat and the residual metallic tang of his earlier injury, made her inhale sharply, a deep, involuntary reaction. Then the moment vanished. Sarah pushed him off, regaining her battle focus with a terrifying speed. The two Volkovs, realizing they were facing an ancient determined to protect her property, retreated through the broken door, leaving behind a trail of dust and frustration. Sarah stood tall, smoothing a wrinkle from her crimson sleeve as if nothing had happened. The intense energy in her eyes faded back to the distant amethyst. Liam stood up, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm. "You saved me," he rasped, his throat still sore. You are property of the Drake line Valerius, she said, her voice regaining its icy control. Damage to my possessions reflects poorly on my management. No, Liam countered, stepping closer. You didn't have to save me from that bust. You could have dodged. Why did you hesitate? She looked away, picking up a shard of broken wood. A momentary miscalculation. Do not flatter yourself. And you saved me from the Volkovs. You used your strength to protect me, not your pride, Liam pressed. You acted like my wife. Seraphina's face hardened, more impenetrable than ever. I'm acting as the Drake. The covenant requires you intact. Now leave this room. I have duties. She didn't deny the hunger he saw when she inhaled his scent, and she didn't deny the hesitation he saw when the bust fell. She simply refused to acknowledge the human truth of the moment. The attack's failure did not go unnoticed. Within the hour, Lord Cayen swept into the archive, surveying the damage with a calculating frown. Incompetent fools, he muttered, referring to the Volkovs, not his niece. He turned to Liam and Sarah, who stood several feet apart, a vast chasm of unspoken words between them. This is unacceptable, Cayen declared, his voice booming. The covenant cannot be compromised by such petty raids. Until the blood union is consummated, the threat remains active. He looked directly at Seraphina. You have proved you cannot keep him safe when he is allowed to roam. The solution is simple: containment. Cayen clapped his hands once. Two silent, older vampires appeared instantly. You too, Cayen instructed, pointing at Liam and Sarah. You will share the isolation chamber in the North Tower until the covenant is fulfilled. It is magically sealed. There will be no distraction, no escape, and no physical distance to hide behind. Perhaps proximity will encourage you, Seraphina? Sarah's face remained impassive, but Liam saw the flicker of panic in her eyes. The isolation chamber was a small, ancient space, a secure box designed for confinement. There was no Valerius wing, no large bed, no high windows for her to stare out of. There was just them. In the North Tower, the new chamber was sparse. A single small bed built into the wall, a heavy velvet-draped wardrobe, and a single unadorned stone table. No windows. The air was thick and heavy, designed to muffle sound and sight from the outside. As the heavy iron door sealed with a sickening clank, Liam and Seraphina stood a foot apart. Your uncle wants to force the issue, Liam said, running a hand over the cold stone wall. Sarah finally met his gaze, and for the first time, her voice held a note of pure, contained despair. He wants to force my hand to break my rule, she corrected, her voice barely a whisper. He knows that here, if I lose control, there will be nowhere to run. Nowhere to hide the monster from you. Liam looked from the small bed to her terrified eyes. The refusal, the coldness, the hatred she pretended to have, it was all a shield. Now the shield was gone, and they were trapped in a cage with her silent hunger. He had saved her from the falling stone. Now who would save him from her? The isolation chamber was a lesson in forced intimacy. It wasn't the size that suffocated, but the unrelenting presence of the other. The stone walls, enchanted to block sound and light, also trapped every scent and breath. For Liam Valerius, it was the smell of ancient dust and a faint, sweet ozone, Seraphina's natural aura. For Seraphina von Drake, it was the constant, overwhelming scent of warm, vibrant life, specifically his life, the tempting pulse under the thin layer of his skin. She hadn't slept on the bed since they were locked in. Instead, she sat rigidly on the floor, her back against the thick stone wall, her knees drawn up. She was an exquisite statue of self-control. On the third night of their confinement, Liam finally broke the tense silence. He was sitting on the edge of the small bed, watching her. How long can you maintain this? He asked softly. Sarah didn't move. As long as necessary. You fought your own blood with more desperation than you fought the Volkovs, Liam continued, his voice calm. You didn't want to drink your own blood in the library. You didn't hesitate when I was in danger in the archive. Your refusal is not about hatred, Sarah. It's about fear. That struck her. Her amethyst eyes finally snapped to his, filled with a glacial fury that usually silenced mortals. Do not project your simple human sentiments onto me, Valerius, she hissed, her voice a whip crack. It's not projection, it's observation, Liam countered, standing up. He walked slowly, deliberately, and sat down 2 feet away from her. The proximity made her entire body tense, but she held her ground. Ilara found the fragmented prophecy. Her hunger shall never again be quenched. That's why you refuse the bond. You're terrified of becoming a monster, not just of killing me. The color drained from her face, leaving her pale as a moonbeam, He knew he had hit the truth. "And you think revealing my deepest curse makes you safe?" she whispered, her voice trembling with barely contained power. "It makes us partners in this trap," Liam corrected. "Cayen put us here to force the bond. He's counting on the pressure, on your eventual breakdown. We can fight the hunger together, Sarah. Not by ignoring it, but by acclimatizing to it." "Acclimatize?" she scoffed. "You speak of my ancient curse as if it were a simple fever. If you fight the temptation constantly, you deplete your focus," Liam argued, leaning slightly closer. "But if you face the temptation daily, repeatedly, like exposure therapy, you can build a tolerance. You need to learn to endure my scent, my presence, without consuming me. And you can only do that by letting me close." For a long moment, Sarah simply stared at him, her chest barely rising. She was calculating the risk, the profound, agonizing danger of his proposal. Later that night, the chamber's magical ceiling suddenly pulsed, sending a visible wave of unstable energy through the room. Sarah cried out, a sharp, ragged sound of pain clutching her head. The destabilized covenant magic, likely due to Cayen's manipulation from outside, was hitting her, the living vessel of the covenant, directly. "Sarah. What is it?" Liam rushed to her. "The bond, it's demanding payment," she choked out, her hands shaking violently. Her eyes were no longer amethyst, they were a vibrant, shimmering gold, a sign of her power being destabilized. As the pain intensified, her primal instincts took over. She lunged, not to bite but to grasp the nearest solid object. That object was Liam's arm. Her grip was iron. Her fingers dug in, not with claws, but with the immense, sudden strength of a creature in agony. Liam gasped, the pressure instantly bruising his forearm. He could feel the fine bones under her grip protesting. She was hurting him badly, but her eyes were closed, locked in her internal battle. "Fight it, Sarah. Control the focus," he gritted out, enduring the crushing pain. "Focus on the pain in your hand, not the taste under my skin." He didn't pull away. He held his breath, forcing himself to remain still, a human anchor in her storm. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, the golden glow in her eyes receded. Her grip relaxed, leaving behind 5 deep, purple contusions on Liam's arm. She looked at the bruises, then at his face, a face that held not accusation but an intense, weary empathy. Her control snapped. She sprang away from him, retreating to the darkest corner, her arms wrapping tightly around herself. "Get away from me," she cried, a raw, tormented sound. "I hurt you. I cannot control it when the power shifts. This is why I refuse the bond. I will kill you, Liam, and I will be devoured by the hunger. Your plan is foolish, it is death." Liam rubbed his bruised arm, the pain a dull ache against the adrenaline. "No, your fear is death," he corrected, his voice firm. "We almost broke through that moment. If you can endure the pain of that hunger while holding me, you can survive the blood union." He walked over to the small bed and lay down on one side. He left a generous space for her, but in the small chamber, it was still close enough that he could feel the cold radiating off her. "We have no choice, Sarah," he said, looking at the ceiling. "Cayen is starving the covenant. The attacks will get worse. The instability will get worse. We must either fulfill the covenant or break it." He waited. The silence was heavier than any stone. After what felt like an eternity, Seraphina slowly, cautiously, walked over to the bed. Her movement was hesitant, like a wild creature approaching a snare. She didn't look at him. She lay on the very edge of the bed, her back stiffly to him. Her body was rigid, her presence still glacial. But she was on the bed. They were sharing the space. Liam understood the silent, terrifying concession. The deal: she was allowing him to become the object of her agonizing temptation. By enduring his proximity, she hoped to wear down the edges of her curse. It was a perilous, intimate strategy that placed her monstrous hunger and his mortal life on the same small mattress. Liam closed his eyes. They were trapped, forced into a deadly intimacy that was now the only path to survival. The proximity trap had been sprung. The isolation chamber became a strange, pressurized sanctuary. By day, Liam spent his hours pacing the few feet of available space, attempting to decipher the fragmented ancient texts Alara had smuggled in. Seraphina remained on the bed, lying stiffly on the opposite edge, pretending the mortal's presence was merely an inconvenient piece of furniture. By night the routine was different. Liam would lie down and Sarah would follow, her every muscle protesting the act. Her back remained resolutely turned to him, but the close quarters meant that when either of them shifted, they felt the other's movement, the subtle twitch of her hand, the warmth of his breath. To fight the silent hunger, Liam started talking. He didn't speak of love or marriage, he spoke of the mundane, the mortal. My grandmother, the one who was the keeper before my father, she had a terrible laugh, Liam murmured into the darkness one evening. It sounded like a rusty gate swinging open. She used to sneak me sugary biscuits even though she knew my mother would punish me. Sarah remained silent for a long time. Liam thought she had drifted into her meditative, undead state. Just as he was about to give up, her voice, low and strained, cut through the darkness. Humans are defined by their flaws, she said, her voice dry. That terrible laugh, that simple biscuit, these are the things that make your brief lives precious. And what defines an immortal, Sarah? Liam asked. Loss, she replied instantly, the word carrying the weight of centuries. We are defined by the accumulation of loss. This was the opening Liam needed. He didn't press. He simply offered his own vulnerability. Tell me about it. Not the covenant but the loss. A profound stillness settled. Then she began to speak, her voice hollow as if reciting a forgotten dirge. I was not always this disciplined, she confessed. 8 centuries ago when I was first made, I was wild. The hunger was a constant, glorious storm. I took many lives carelessly. And then there was Lyra. Liam held his breath. Lyra was a healer. Mortal, Sarah continued, her voice catching on the name. She was the first to look at me without fear, even when my eyes were glowing with the thirst. I loved her. She knew the terms of my existence, and she offered herself to me, hoping the blood union would stabilize the coven's power during a dark era. Sarah let out a shuddering breath. I accepted. I thought my control was strong enough. But the ritual, the bond was too potent, too deep. The curse was activated not by the act, but by the love I felt. I didn't just drink. The hunger took over. It became an unquenchable fire, and I drained her completely. She was the Valerius keeper of that time. Her life was the catalyst. The air in the chamber felt suddenly cold. When I woke, she was dust, Sarah finished. And the covenant had gained a temporary, terrible power. I had saved my people, but the act of true, loving consumption unleashed the ultimate, monstrous hunger that only the death of the Valerius could temporarily quell. My soul was chained to her bloodlust, never to be satisfied again. Liam finally understood the depth of her refusal. It wasn't pride, it was a desperate penance. She wasn't afraid of killing him, she was terrified of what she would become after killing him, an immortal monster consumed by eternal, insatiable thirst. The prophecy Alara found, Liam said softly. It says, her hunger shall never again be quenched. You fulfilled it with Lyra. Yes, Sarah confirmed. And the only reason I am not a roving beast is the magical seal I placed on myself. A constant, agonizing restraint. Drinking your blood, Liam, would not only destroy you, but it would shatter that restraint forever. I would save the coven, but I would become a plague. Later, around 3 a.m., the confinement magic pulsed again, stronger this time. Cayen was definitely attempting to provoke a reaction. Sarah's whole body arched, the pain of the restraining seal tearing at her mind. It's too strong, she gasped, clutching her temples. The gold was back in her eyes, flickering violently. Don't fight the pain, fight the focus. Liam scrambled up. You need a distraction. Something intricate. What do drakes do when they can't hunt? We calculate, she choked out. Fine. Calculations it is. Liam grabbed a piece of charcoal and a rough piece of parchment from the stone table. Tell me the distance from the sun to the earth in ancient units. No, wait, tell me how you would calculate the exact path of a stray celestial body through our atmosphere. Use your mind, not your teeth. Sarah, driven by the desperate need to anchor herself, followed his frantic lead. She began to speak in rapid, complicated astronomical terms, her hands trembling as she grabbed the charcoal. But her concentration wavered. Her hand shook so violently that the charcoal snapped. I can't, she whimpered, her face contorting with hunger and pain. Yes, you can, Liam insisted. He carefully took the charcoal from her and gently closed her fingers around the thicker, flat side of a broken stone fragment. He kept his hand over hers for a moment, guiding her. It was their first deliberate, non-violent touch. Look at the stone, Sarah. Feel the roughness. Feel the cold, he commanded, forcing her focus onto the sensory detail. This is real. The hunger is a lie. Focus on the shape. Sarah's struggle was immense. But under the warmth of his steady hand, the golden flicker slowly dimmed. She started sketching, not stars, but the precise, complex Gothic architecture of Castle Drake, every arch and gargoyle a testament to control. When the pain finally subsided, Liam slowly withdrew his hand. Sarah looked at the sketch, perfect, detailed, and completely dry. She had focused on the art, not the thirst. "You are a terrifying distraction, Valerius," she said, her voice exhausted. "You're a terrifying survivor, Sarah," Liam replied honestly. Liam finally drifted off to sleep an hour later, the pain in his arm forgotten, replaced by the profound satisfaction of that shared, desperate moment. Seraphina waited until she was absolutely certain he was unconscious. The silence returned, but this time, it was filled with something soft, something human. She rolled over cautiously and looked at his sleeping profile. His bruises were already fading, a testament to his mortal healing speed. He had offered his body, his scent, and his mind, risking everything for her sanity. She reached out a single finger, tracing the line of his jaw, a gentle, feather-light touch that carried 8 centuries of repressed emotion. "You idiot," she whispered, the words barely escaping her lips. "You came here as a sacrifice, but you are becoming my greatest hope. And that," she paused, her voice cracking with the terrible weight of her love, "is why I will never be able to let you die." She withdrew her hand quickly, her self-imposed control crashing back down. But the truth was out, whispered into the cold stone of the proximity trap. The subtle strain within the isolation chamber became a deafening roar. Every few hours, the magical seal on the door would violently thrum, sending waves of agonizing psychic feedback directly into Seraphina. This was Lord Cayen's insidious hand, purposefully destabilizing the Covenant magic to break her control. Seraphina lay rigid, her face pale with the effort of fighting the amplified hunger. Liam Valerius was her only anchor, his presence a constant, searing temptation that she had to learn to ignore by focusing on his voice, on the slow rise and fall of his chest just inches away. "Tell me about the stars again," she choked out one night, her voice hoarse. Liam, who was gently massaging her bruised arm, a necessary physical contact to soothe the muscular tension caused by her control, began to speak about the mortal concept of astronomy, his voice a steady drone of normalcy. Meanwhile, outside the North Tower, Elara was running out of time. She sensed the danger emanating from the isolation chamber and knew Cayen was accelerating his plans. Trusting only her own lineage, she infiltrated the deepest, most restricted section of the Valerius Library, an underground vault rarely accessed since the original covenant was signed. Using the clues from the fragmented scroll, she searched for the Drake Coven's true founding text, a document meant to be destroyed centuries ago. She found it tucked inside a preserved human skull, a gruesome ancient joke. The text was written in a long-dead language, which Elara, with her hybrid knowledge, painstakingly translated. The first part confirmed Sarah's curse, the unquenchable hunger unleashed by a loving bond. But the last stanza, the part deliberately omitted from the covenant taught to the mortals, was the true horror. And when the immortal's hunger is satisfied by the keeper's love, the mortal's sacrifice is but a necessary passing, for he shall rise again, the shadow keeper, blood-bound to her darkness. The two lives merge, and neither shall rest until the final sun sets. Her freedom is his chain. His life is her curse. Elara gasped, dropping the parchment. It wasn't about Liam's death, it was about his permanent transformation into a slave of the blood union, a creature bound to Seraphina's eternal cycle of hunger and despair. Sarah's great fear wasn't killing the man she loved, but damning him to her monstrous existence, forcing him to lose his mortal soul and identity. "He lives, but he changes," Elara whispered, finally understanding Seraphina's profound, desperate self-sacrifice. The Covenant's key wasn't Liam's blood alone, it was the merging of two halves, one mortal, one immortal, creating the Shadow Keeper to guard the Coven's power. Inside the chamber, the magic pulsed one last, terrible time, a massive, psychic discharge from the unstable Covenant. Seraphina's control broke. She didn't scream, she fell into a silent, internal abyss, a blood vision. In the vision, she wasn't the regal Seraphina, she was the monstrous, true form of her hunger, eyes of pure crimson, skin covered in runic shadows. She saw Liam not as her husband but as a vessel. And in the vision she attacked. She felt the searing warmth of his life force flooding her, glorious and unstoppable. The vision was so real, so intoxicating, that her body arched on the bed, her teeth involuntarily grazing the skin of her own lip. Liam, sensing the abrupt, terrifying coldness radiating from her, woke with a jolt. Sarah was shuddering violently, her eyes wide open but unfocused, the golden power overwhelming the amethyst. She was lost in the vision, her hands clawing at the air. "Sarah, look at me," Liam shouted, but she was beyond his voice. Knowing the risk, Liam lunged forward. He didn't restrain her. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close, resting her cheek against his own. It was a complete, protective physical embrace. The ultimate offering. The scent of his blood, his warmth, the frantic beat of his mortal heart, it all crashed into Seraphina's consciousness. The monstrous, seductive vision of consumption began to fade, replaced by the real, tangible human contact. "You are here, Sarah," Liam whispered urgently into her ear. "The shadow is a lie. This is real. This is me. Feel the pulse, not the thirst. Look at the bruise you gave me. You are a survivor, not a monster." Slowly, agonizingly, the gold receded. Seraphina's limbs went limp in his embrace, her breath catching in a ragged sob. She was back, anchored by the man whose life she was so desperately trying to protect. She pulled back, trembling, tears of pure horror tracing lines through the faint dust on her cheeks. "I saw it, Liam. The thing I become. It's not death I fear for you, it is the eternal damnation of being bound to that monster. Then we will fight the damnation," Liam vowed, holding her gaze. "Together." Hours later, the lock on the isolation chamber hissed, not the booming, heavy sound of Cayen's guards, but a soft, mechanical click. Seraphina instantly tensed. An intrusion. Quiet. It wasn't a guard. Sliding under the heavy door, a tightly folded piece of parchment appeared. Liam snatched it up. The paper was rough, carrying the faint scent of human-made sulfur and herbs, Ilara. The message was brief, hastily scrawled in their private Valerius cipher. L. Covenant equals transformation. Not death. The price is you become her eternal chain. Seek the two halves. The key is not blood but a choice of sacrifice. Liam's world tilted. His death was a lie. Seraphina's great sacrifice, her agonizing self-imprisonment, had been based on an incomplete truth. He wouldn't die, but he would become the Shadow Keeper, bound forever to her hunger. He looked at Seraphina, who was watching him with wide, fearful eyes, the truth of his destiny now painfully clear. Her curse was his terrifying, eternal future. The small, dark space of the isolation chamber felt impossibly vast as Liam Valerius held the crumpled note. The truth had shifted the entire foundation of their marriage. He wouldn't die, he would be damned to eternal, bound existence. Transformation, Liam said, his voice flat, staring at Seraphina. Not death. All this time, your agony, your refusal, the constant hunger, it was to prevent me from losing my soul and becoming your eternal chain. Seraphina recoiled, her face a mixture of guilt and self-loathing. They lied to me, Liam. After Lyra, after what I did, I found the hidden texts. They said the hunger would consume me first, turning me into a creature beyond control, and that you would be the only one who could stop me by dying to break the bond. She paused, her voice shaking. I thought the lie was my safety net. I thought if I believed I was saving your life I could endure this. I never knew. I never knew the truth was worse. Worse for me or worse for you? Liam challenged gently. You were willing to be miserable for centuries just so I wouldn't lose my mortal identity. You sacrificed your only chance at peace. Stop punishing yourself, Sarah. We face this now together with the whole truth. He showed her Ilara's final cryptic line. The key is not blood but a choice of sacrifice. Seraphina's vampiric intellect took over. She closed her eyes, delving into the centuries of ancient lore she had hidden away. The Covenant's inception. The old ways, she murmured. It was designed to protect the Drake line from the Shadow King, but the Drakes were wary of the Valerius power. The blood union was their simplest, most forceful way to enslave the Valerius line. She finally retrieved a small silver locket from the neckline of her dress, an item she had kept hidden even from Liam. Inside, a minuscule, brittle piece of parchment was folded. This is the alternative rites text, she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. I found it after Lyra's tragedy. I never used it because the price was too high for me. Together they deciphered the elegant, deadly script. To prevent the rise of the Shadow Keeper, a sacrifice of the soul must be performed. The immortal must renounce the gift of eternal life, giving a fragment of longevity to the mortal. The mortal must renounce the gift of mortality, giving up the Valerius name and identity. If we follow this ritual, Sarah explained, her voice tight, I lose a part of my immortality. I become finite in some way. And you lose your lineage, your family's identity, the very name that defines you as the keeper. It's the ultimate choice of sacrifice, Liam realized. You lose your endless time, I lose my history. We both give up what defines us to save our souls from the Covenant's curse. Sarah's sacrifice, a fragment of her endless life to empower Liam with slowed aging and a resistance to the darkness. Liam's sacrifice, the Valerius name, identity and the associated power, which must be severed by burning the Valerius Keeper's medallion at the moon altar. Unaware of their plans, Lord Cayen was pacing his study. He had detected a strange, non-aggressive synergy coming from the isolation chamber, a mental connection that suggested they were solving the puzzle, not succumbing to the hunger. They seek the bypass, Cayen snarled, slamming his fist onto his desk. They will not rob the Drake lineage of the Shadow Keeper. The covenant must be fulfilled in the blood. He activated the magical resonance with the chamber one last time, sending a powerful surge of energy not to cause pain, but to magically suppress Sarah's strength, temporarily nullifying her speed and agility, ensuring she couldn't fight her way out. Inside the chamber, the surge hit Seraphina like a physical blow, leaving her gasping, her limbs heavy. Cayen knows, she managed to whisper. He's suppressing my speed. He'll be here by dawn to force the blood union. Then we move now, Liam declared, his heart pounding but his resolve ironclad. The moon altar is in the crypts below the old chapel. The Valerius medallion is hidden in the wall behind the chamber's bed. It's the last piece of my identity I must sacrifice. Seraphina, though weakened, forced herself up. She walked to the wall behind the bed, running her hand over the cold stone. She muttered an ancient vampire spell of structural decay. The stone softened and Liam reached in, pulling out a heavy, tarnished silver medallion inscribed with the Valerius crest. The door is locked and my strength is compromised, Sarah said, her voice strained. The key is 2 halves, Liam recited, remembering Alara's note. I am the key and you are the lock. Liam took the small, obsidian dagger Sarah kept hidden in her boot. He focused on the bruise on his arm, the one she had given him in Chapter 4, the physical evidence of their bond. He sliced his finger and pressed the single drop of his blood onto the locking mechanism on the iron door. The covenant required blood but not a full union. Sarah placed her hand on the cold blood print and channeled her fragment of longevity magic. A controlled, precise surge of energy designed to unlock, not consume. The heavy iron door hissed, the magical seal shattered, and the lock snapped open. They were free. The crypts, Liam said, tucking the medallion into his jacket. We have to reach the moon altar before Cayen catches us. Sarah looked at Liam, her eyes burning with a desperate mixture of fear and newfound hope. She had always refused to drink his blood to save him. Now she would race with him into the dark to save his soul. The silent, dusty air of Castle Drake's hidden passages enveloped Liam and Seraphina. Liam led the way, relying on fragmented maps his cousin Alara had once shown him. Seraphina, though swift, moved with a strange, exhausting slowness, a direct result of Lord Cayen's magic suppressing her ancient strength. The crypt of the keepers is beneath the chapel, Liam whispered, his hand firmly gripping Seraphina's. It was the first time their touch felt less like a dangerous anchor and more like a shared lifeline. We enter there, and the moon altar is the centerpiece. Cayen will not wait. Seraphina's breath was shallow. He knows the alternative rite is my escape from his power, and your escape from the Shadow Keeper transformation. He will guard the crypt. A heavy, sickening thud echoed from the passage behind them. Cayen was close. They burst out of the passage and into the vast, circular crypt of the keepers. It was a labyrinth of ancient stone sarcophagi, dimly lit by torches whose flames seemed to avoid the deepest shadows. Standing directly in the path of the moon altar was Lord Cayen, flanked by 2 enormous, cold-eyed vampire guards. Cayen's face was a mask of cold fury. You disappoint me, Seraphina, Cayen's voice sliced through the silence. You would throw away your ancient bloodline's destiny for the fleeting sentiment of a human. My destiny is my own, uncle, Seraphina countered, stepping slightly in front of Liam, despite her weakness. And the covenant will be sealed, but on our terms. The only terms that matter are the blood union, Cayen growled, pointing a long, accusing finger at Liam. Give me the human, Seraphina. Or I will take him and you will watch the Shadow Keeper rise. Before Sarah could fully launch her weakened counterattack, Liam stepped forward, meeting Cayen's intimidating gaze. You want the Keeper's blood, Cayen? Liam demanded, his voice echoing with a surprising newfound authority. You'll have to earn it. Liam knew Seraphina, in her suppressed state, couldn't defeat Cayen and 2 guards. He had to buy her time to reach the altar. Using the brass candlestick strategy from the archive, but relying on speed and misdirection, Liam engaged the 2 guards. He didn't fight to win, he fought to distract. He ducked under a wide, slow swipe from the first guard, then kicked a loose stone, sending it skittering under the second guard's feet. He used the sarcophagi as cover, forcing the massive vampires into narrow spaces, limiting their speed. Cayen watched, his eyes narrowing in cold amusement and mounting rage. He was focused on Liam, momentarily forgetting Seraphina. Incompetent mortals. Cayen roared, lunging past the guards. His speed was terrifying, a blur of ancient, pure power. Liam knew he couldn't dodge. He stood his ground, letting the knowledge of his sacrifice guide him. Seraphina seized the moment of distraction. She raced past the flailing combatants, reaching the center of the crypt. The moon altar was a large, obsidian slab inscribed with runes of both human and vampire origins. It was positioned directly beneath a skylight, now bathing in the intense silver light of the full moon. She placed the Valerius medallion on the altar's center crest. She then took the small silver locket containing the fragment of longevity text and opened it, holding it over the medallion. She began chanting the words of the sacrifice of the soul in a low, ancient tongue. I, Seraphina von Drake, Ancient of the Blood, renounce the gift of eternal time. I offer this fragment of endless life to bind the covenant, and deny the rise of the Shadow Keeper. The locket dissolved into a plume of white, shimmering smoke, which immediately coiled around the Valerius medallion. The medallion began to glow with a faint, steady silver light. Now it was Liam's turn. The text required, the mortal must renounce the gift of mortality, giving up the Valerius name and identity. Cayen's hand closed around Liam's neck. This time there was no hesitation. The grip was crushing, designed to end the fight and force the blood union out of desperation. Liam's vision swam. The ritual ends now, Keeper, Cayen hissed, his fangs elongating. The blood union will be sealed here. And your bride will pay the price of her resistance. Liam was dying. The pressure on his throat cut off air and blood supply. His strength was fading rapidly. But as the silver light from the altar reached them, Liam remembered Seraphina's confession in the chamber. The refusal was rooted in love, not hatred. And he remembered his vow, you will live. That is my only rule. He had to make the choice now to give up his Valerius name. With his last ounce of conscious will fighting against the crushing darkness, Liam spoke a single ragged word into the crypt. I renounce. The moment he spoke, the Valerius medallion on the moon altar erupted in a brilliant, consuming pillar of silver fire. The flame rushed towards Liam, bypassing Cayen entirely. The fire struck Liam's chest, searing the Valerius crest that marked his lineage, and instantly shattering Cayen's grip. Cayen roared in pain and fury, shielded from the light, but unable to withstand its power. The Valerius name was gone. The mortal identity was sacrificed. Liam slumped to the ground, his body racked with pain, but the darkness that was pulling him under was not the darkness of death. It was the profound, soul-deep exhaustion of losing his core identity. Seraphina rushed to him, her eyes wide with fear and relief. The ritual was complete, but the price had been paid in full. Cayen, blinded by the silver light and rage, staggered toward them. You chose the curse, Seraphina? You are now bound to his mortal fate. No, uncle, Seraphina said, standing over Liam, the light from the altar illuminating her face. Her suppressed powers were slowly returning, energized by the ritual's completion. I chose his life. She reached down, pulling Liam's bruised and exhausted body close to her. As the last of the silver fire faded, leaving Liam unconscious, she cradled him, her lips pressing against the deep bruises on his arm, the very place she had once unintentionally hurt him. The covenant was sealed. The sacrifice of the soul was complete. Liam was alive but changed. The silver fire from the moon altar receded, leaving the crypt of the keepers steeped in an eerie, expectant silence. Liam lay still near the altar, the mark of the Valerius crest on his chest now a faint, scarred line, the physical proof of his sacrificed identity. Seraphina stood over him, her body humming with a power she hadn't felt in centuries. The suppression Cayen had placed on her was shattered by the sacrifice of the soul ritual. Even though she had given away a fragment of longevity, the Covenant's magic had recognized her selfless act and empowered her as its true guardian. Lord Cayen, momentarily stunned by the silver light, roared and lunged, his final desperate move. You think you have one niece? The Covenant is sealed with chaos. I will take his life now and free you from this mortal fool. Seraphina didn't flinch. She was no longer fighting with rage, she was fighting with absolute authority. Her eyes glowed a calm, intense amethyst, the focused power of a queen. As Cayen charged, Seraphina raised her hand. She didn't use brute strength or fangs. She used the bonded magic of the newly sealed covenant. A complex net of ancient, glowing runes erupted from the floor, trapping Cayen mid-stride. "Your tyranny ends here, uncle," Seraphina's voice was calm, resonating with a deeper, more ancient power than his own. "You sought to enslave the covenant with the Shadow Keeper. I have bound it with choice." She looked at the runes that encased Cayen. "I do not kill my own blood, but I deny you the light of the moon, the sun, and the hunger itself. You will exist, Cayen, in a state of eternal, agonizing awareness, frozen by the very power you sought to control." Cayen's body stiffened, his roar cut short, his eyes wide in silent, agonizing realization as the runes locked him into a living, conscious tomb. The two guards, witnessing the terrifying, flawless display of power, immediately fled into the shadows. The crypt was quiet again. Seraphina sank to her knees next to Liam, gently touching his scarred chest. The scent of his blood was now muted, less tantalizing, yet paradoxically, it was now inextricably linked to her, like breathing. "Liam," she whispered, her voice thick with 8 centuries of guarded emotion finally released. Liam's eyelids fluttered. He opened his eyes. They were still the warm, vibrant brown she remembered, but there was a new depth to them, an ancient understanding that hadn't been there before. "Sarah," he whispered, a small weary smile touching his lips. He tried to sit up but his body ached. "The ritual is complete," she said, helping him lean against the altar. "You're safe. No Shadow Keeper." "The name?" "Valerius." Liam frowned, trying to remember the word. "It feels like a story I once read. It doesn't belong to me." "It doesn't," Seraphina confirmed, holding his hand. She noticed the small wound on his palm from the escape attempt was already healing at an impossible speed, a gift from her fragment of longevity. "You gave it up. You are free of the Valerius burden. You are free of mortality's accelerated clock." Liam looked at his hand, then back at Seraphina. He felt a strange lightness, as if a lifetime of responsibility had been lifted. Then he felt a sharp, phantom pain in his own chest, quickly followed by a dull, aching exhaustion. "Sarah," he said, frowning. Are you hurt?" Seraphina was leaning her head back against the cold stone, her breathing shallow. "The sheer effort of controlling Cayen, the magic is demanding rest. A consequence of giving up a fragment of my infinity." Liam realized, with a shock of clarity that transcended human understanding, that the pain he felt was her pain. "We are linked," Liam whispered, realizing the depth of their eternal bond. "The choice of sacrifice, it created a connection that bypasses the hunger. It's a bond of empathy." Seraphina looked at him, her eyes finally filling with the warm, vulnerable truth she had denied for centuries. "I feel your peace, Liam. I feel your relief. I feel the human part of me, the part one thought I lost with Lyra, return." Liam was no longer the Valerius Keeper, but he was not an enslaved Shadow Keeper either. He was something new, the Shadow Keeper's anchor. And Seraphina was no longer the reluctant bride, but the Shadow Keeper's bride, a title that now represented love, protection, and balance rather than fear. "I need a name," Liam said, searching her eyes. "I am no longer Valerius." Seraphina traced the scar on his chest. "You are the one who chose to anchor the eternal. You faced the monster and gave it hope. From this day forward until the final sun sets," she vowed, her voice filled with tenderness and finality, "you will be known simply as Liam Drake." She sealed the vow with a kiss, a touch that was now possible, no longer a symbol of deadly temptation, but a promise of a complex, shared eternity. The hours following the ritual in the crypt were a blur of exhaustion and revelation. Seraphina led the recovering Liam Drake through the quiet passages of Castle Drake to a small, private chapel she had always considered a sanctuary. Liam lay on a cushioned pew, his body thrumming with a strange internal energy. The sacrifice of the soul had stripped him of the Valerius name, but it had replaced his inherent mortality with a gift from Seraphina's fragment of longevity. His cuts from the fight with Cayen had vanished completely. He could hear the faint scuttling of mice in the stone walls and smell the metallic tang of dried blood from the crypt, senses sharpened beyond human capability. But the most profound change was the silence where his history used to be. The word Valerius felt alien. His father's face was a blur. He was a man without a past, defined only by the present and his new name, Liam Drake. "How do you feel?" Seraphina asked, sitting beside him, her long fingers intertwining with his. "Like a vessel," Liam replied, closing his eyes. "Empty of one purpose but full of another." "And you, Sarah? You feel relieved but desperately weary." Sarah nodded. The empathy bond was fully active. She no longer had to speak for him to understand her emotional state. The agonizing edge of the ancient hunger was gone. Liam's continuous life energy, now slowed and stabilized by the fragment of longevity, was sustaining her existence. It was like a constant, gentle infusion of warmth, not the violent, demanding torrent of true bloodlust. "My hunger is quiet, Liam," she admitted, a genuine smile, the first he'd truly seen, touching her lips. "It is a profound silence. Your life force is my balance. It is enough to live but not enough to be truly sated. That part of me, the beast, is sleeping." Later that evening, the high elders of the Drake Coven gathered in the Great Hall. The silence was tense. They expected their queen, Seraphina, to report the enforced blood union and the rise of the Shadow Keeper. Instead, Seraphina stood before them, tall and regal. She spoke in clear, measured tones, announcing Lord Cayen's defeat and his capture. "The covenant is sealed," she declared, her eyes sweeping over the anxious faces. "But not with blood. It is sealed with choice. The Valerius line has paid the highest price, the sacrifice of the soul. The mortal's sacrifice was not death, but his identity. The keeper is gone and in his place, a new protector stands." She motioned to Liam, who stepped forward, now dressed in simple, elegant dark clothing, no longer the formal robes of the Valerius. "This is Liam Drake," Seraphina announced, placing her hand on his shoulder. "My husband, my anchor, and the keeper of the covenant's balance. The blood union is negated. We are no longer bound by fear but by a bond of empathy. The Drake line is safe, and I sit upon the throne as the keeper of the balance." The coven members were stunned, but Seraphina's newfound, stabilized power was undeniable. They saw the end of Cayen's tyranny and the cessation of the frightening Volkov raids. They bowed. The reluctant bride was now the undisputed queen. As the hall emptied, a familiar figure rushed towards Liam and Seraphina. Ilara looked exhausted, her vibrant clothes dusty from her own secret journeys. "Liam, you idiot. You really did it," Ilara cried, hugging him tightly. She immediately felt the subtle difference in him, the cool touch, the profound stillness. "He is Liam Drake now, Ilara," Seraphina said softly. "The Valerius is gone. He traded his mortality for our stability." Ilara's eyes welled up, but she understood the weight of the sacrifice. "You traded your blood for his soul. A fair exchange, I suppose. Just make sure the idiot eats or I'll haunt you both." She smiled, the tension easing slightly. That night, in the newly restored master chamber, Seraphina performed a small, intimate ritual. She led Liam to a small basin of clear water, lit by a single silver lamp. The sacrifice of the soul was complete, but it was an emergency bypass, Seraphina explained, her tone now soft, intimate. "My fragment of longevity is finite. Your life force must be maintained." She took the small obsidian dagger and made a tiny clinical prick on her own wrist, letting a single drop of her blood fall into the water. The water immediately glowed a soft, beautiful silver. "Because the bond of empathy is active, I can no longer risk consumption. Instead," she said, holding the silver water out to him, "every month you must drink this. It is a drop of my revitalized blood, infused with the covenant's peace. It will replenish the fragment's energy and ensure your long life, keeping the Shadow Keeper at bay." Liam looked at the silver liquid. It wasn't the agonizing temptation she had fought, it was a potion of eternal care. It was the ultimate reversal of their initial dynamic. He gently took the basin from her hand and drank the liquid. It was cool, metallic, and comforting. As he finished, a wave of her deep, loving relief washed over him through their bond. Seraphina smiled, her eyes shining. "Now rest, my anchor. You are eternal, but I am still the eternal who requires sleep." They lay down on the large bed, Seraphina no longer on the edge but curled up, resting her head gently on Liam's chest. She had finally accepted the profound vulnerability of true love. Liam, the former mortal, now the anchor to the eternal, closed his eyes, his heart beating a slow, steady rhythm, ready to face their long-shared future. Life in Castle Drake settled into a profound, yet precarious, rhythm. Liam Drake and Seraphina shared a closeness that was both physical and psychic. Liam, the former mortal, found his new senses overwhelming. He often spent his mornings in the deepest parts of the castle, learning to filter out the sounds of distant life, the chirping bats, the rustle of leaves, the faint, slow heartbeat of the few remaining mortal servants. Seraphina, meanwhile, found herself navigating emotions she thought her long existence had sterilized. One afternoon, while Liam was talking to Ilara about the best ways to communicate with the remaining Valerius allies, Seraphina felt a sharp pang of territorial instinct. It wasn't the monster's hunger but a powerful human-like jealousy. He is mine now, the thought flashed, potent and irrational. Liam, sensing the abrupt surge of heat and tension through their empathy bond, turned to her, his brow furrowed with concern. "Sarah? What's wrong?" Seraphina, momentarily mortified by the transparency of her feelings, managed a cool facade. "Nothing. Just the lingering annoyance of mortal trivialities." But later in their chamber she confessed. "The bond? It shows me your emotions, Liam, but it also shows you mine. I am used to silence. I am finding this sudden vibrant chaos of feeling overwhelming. I have not felt protective possessiveness in 800 years. Liam smiled, kissing her forehead. "Welcome to being alive, my anchor. You can't have my soul without accepting the mortal drama that comes with it." However, not everyone accepted the new order. The Drake Coven's elders, while bowing to Seraphina's power, whispered in the shadows. They watched Liam, the former human who aged slowly and heard too much, with suspicion. "He walks among us, yet he does not thirst," an elder named Viridian voiced during a council meeting. "How do we know the queen did not secretly bind him as a shadow keeper and simply muzzle the beast to deceive us?" Ilara, who was present as Liam's representative, rose sharply. "Liam sacrificed his name to maintain the balance. His existence is the proof of the choice of sacrifice, not consumption. Doubt him, and you doubt your queen's sacrifice." Seraphina let the doubts linger. Fear, after all, was an excellent tool for control. One evening, while Seraphina was examining the scar on Liam's chest, the place where the Valerius crest had been burned away, she noticed a disturbing change. The scar was almost entirely gone, testament to his accelerated healing. But in its place, just over his heart, a faint, shimmering rune had begun to form. It was small, silver, and utterly foreign to both Valerius and Drake lore. "What is this?" Seraphina whispered, tracing the symbol with a cold finger. Liam felt a familiar wave of her anxiety through their bond. "It doesn't hurt. Just feels full. Like a lock waiting for a key." Seraphina paled. "The Covenant's magic is never idle. The rune is not Drake. It is ancient. Older than our alliance. I fear the balance we struck is fragile, Liam. The Covenant required a key and you, my love, are that key. But it seems the Covenant is preparing you for a new lock." The next day, Seraphina visited the crypt of the keepers to ensure Lord Cayen's frozen prison was secure. The runes she had cast were flawless. Cayen was trapped, a silent, raging monument of tyranny. But as she approached him, she sensed a subtle disturbance. A cold, psychic tremor rippled from his petrified body, a faint, decaying energy that spread outward through the stone. She realized what had happened. Before she sealed him, Cayen had poured the last of his immense, malignant will into a psychic beacon, a final desperate act of vengeance. "He used his binding to send a signal," Seraphina muttered, her heart sinking. She rushed back to Liam. "Cayen is imprisoned, but he has left a final curse," she explained, her voice urgent. "He knew the Covenant was sealed, but he sent out a signal to the only entity powerful enough to break a bond of this magnitude." Liam, sensing her terror, held her close. "Who's Sarah? Who is stronger than the Covenant itself?" Seraphina looked into his eyes, her protective mask finally crumbling, revealing the ancient fear she carried. "The Shadow King Azmar," she whispered the name with reverence and dread. "The ancient enemy we created the Covenant to defend against. Asmer feeds on unstable power and broken bonds. He sees the Covenant as an affront. He is drawn to the scent of a false balance." "And Cayen's beacon?" "It was an invitation," Seraphina finished, her voice cold with finality. "An invitation to destroy the choice of sacrifice and claim you as the true, unrestrained shadow keeper he always desired. The shadow of the past was not an old enemy, it was the ultimate living threat now surging toward them, drawn by the scent of their new, fragile love." The atmosphere within Castle Drake had shifted from stable tension to outright dread. Shadow King Azmar's ancient name was enough to freeze the blood of any vampire, even the powerful Drake Coven. Liam Drake, his senses hyper-alert, stood with Seraphina and Ilara in the deepest chamber of the Valerius archive, attempting to decipher the rune pulsing faintly over his heart. "Yet Drake nahi hai," Seraphina muttered, her fingers skimming over the silvery symbol. "Or ye Valerius be nahi hai. I sense an energy here that is pure, consuming darkness." Ilara, using her knowledge of ancient scripts and her witch heritage, finally traced the symbol to a forgotten glossary of pre-vampire lore. Her eyes widened in horror. "This is the language of the first darkness," Ilara whispered, trembling. The rune translates to the living key. Liam felt a chill, despite the persistent warmth the fragment of longevity provided. The living key? To what, exactly? Seraphina took a shuddering breath, the time for half-truths finally over. She walked to an ancient, sealed mural on the chamber wall and using her bonded magic she lifted the magical wards, revealing the full, terrifying truth of the covenant. The covenant was not forged for peace, Liam, Seraphina confessed, her eyes fixed on the mural depicting monstrous, shadowy figures attacking a fortified castle. It was forged for war and then for imprisonment. She pointed to the largest, darkest figure on the mural, a creature of absolute shadow. That is Shadow King Azmar. 8 centuries ago, his power threatened to consume not just the mortal world, but the very essence of vampire existence. The Valerius lineage, she continued, tracing a line on the mural that ended at a glowing human figure, were not merely keepers of a treaty. They were a line of mortals whose souls possessed a unique innate purity. They were the perfect key, pure life, capable of locking away the ultimate darkness. She then pointed to a figure that resembled herself. And the Drake bloodline, my bloodline, were cursed with the power to become the living lock. The blood union was the ritual needed to activate the lock and turn the Valerius key to a shadow keeper, a powerful, bound guardian designed to maintain Asmer's prison. Liam stared at the mural, the pieces of the puzzle falling into a devastating hole. The marriage, the refusal, the curse, it all made sense. You were always meant to be the prison, Liam said softly, realizing the full extent of her sacrifice. Yes, Seraphina confirmed, the shame heavy in her voice. The lock requires an eternal watchman. That was the Shadow Keeper's role. My curse, the unquenchable hunger, was the side effect of Lyra's death. But my purpose was to be the living prison that held the key. But with the sacrifice of the soul, Liam concluded, touching the rune on his chest, I am no longer the Shadow Keeper. I am now a living key, energized by your immortality. You gave me the power to activate the lock, but without the consumption you have no watchman. You have only the prison itself. Seraphina looked at him, her eyes pleading. Asmer is coming, Liam. He knows the lock me, is weakened by love, and the key you, is walking free. His goal is to break the lock and escape the prison forever. As the terrifying realization settled, the castle was suddenly plunged into an abyss of chilling sound. A massive, non-physical force slammed into Castle Drake. The source was the Shadow King. The attack was purely psychic. A wave of pure, unfiltered mortal dread and vampire despair washed over the coven. Guards dropped their weapons, clutching their heads. Elders shrieked, driven mad by visions of their deepest fears. Liam felt a crushing weight of absolute hopelessness through his empathy bond. Seraphina was reeling, fighting the urge to surrender to the ancient, soul-numbing terror Asmer projected. He is using our fear. Seraphina gasped, her body trembling. He targets the weakness of the bond. He wants to force me to consume you, to destroy the balance. Liam, despite the terror flooding his newly enhanced senses, focused on the anchor he had become. He gripped Seraphina's hand, channeling the peace and resolve he had gained from sacrificing his identity. The shadow is a lie, Sarah. Focus on the choice. Liam roared, pulling her close. We are the balance. He can't break the lock if the key is willing. As the waves of dread intensified, Liam looked at the glowing rune on his chest. He understood his final, terrifying purpose. He was not just the anchor. He was the ultimate weapon against the Shadow King. Sarah, Liam said, his voice firming with a warrior's resolve, tell me the final step. How do we permanently lock him away? The covenant must have a final clause. Seraphina, regaining control, looked at the mural, her eyes burning with grim determination. The final ritual requires the key to enter the lock, a merging of our essence in the face of the darkness. It is a sacrifice of both our freedoms. Tell me what to do, my eternal, Liam said, accepting his destiny as the living key. The arrival of Shadow King Azmar was not an invasion, it was an annihilation of light. The very air in Castle Drake grew heavy, thick with the scent of ozone and the existential dread of non-existence. The torches in the archive where Liam and Seraphina stood dimmed, their flames struggling against the suffocating presence of absolute darkness. He is here, Seraphina whispered, the familiar glacial coldness returning to her voice, not from emotion, but from the sheer effort of containing the terror. He is pure void, Liam. He wants to devour the balance we achieved. Asmer's presence solidified into a swirling vortex of shadows in the main courtyard, a formless yet terrifyingly imposing mass that radiated an ancient, magnetic malice. Seraphina knew their priority. She used the empathy bond to project a focused command to Alara. Take the remaining coven. Evacuate through the south tunnels. The castle must be empty. We go to the crypt. Alara, sensing the finality of the queen's resolve, nodded grimly. She rallied the remaining terrified coven members and fled, leaving Liam and Seraphina alone to face the ancient shadow. Liam gripped the obsidian dagger, the same one Seraphina had used to cut his finger for the escape. He looked at the living key rune pulsing silver over his heart. The final rite, Liam said, his voice steady. Tell me every step, Sarah. No omissions. Seraphina looked resolute, her face a perfect portrait of courage and despair. The moon altar will focus the necessary energies. I must open the living lock, my soul, my very essence, to you. You, the living key, must willingly enter me, not through consumption, but through a transfer of life and soul. And the consequence? We both become the prison, Seraphina explained, tears finally tracing paths on her cheeks. The eternal fusion of lock and key. We will be the Covenant's core, maintaining Asmer's jail. Our freedom, our ability to move or live separately, will be severely limited. We will be eternal, yes, but we will be bound together, forever maintaining the stasis of the prison. A sacrifice of freedom for the world's survival, Liam concluded. I chose that when I renounced the Valerius name. They moved through the shadow-choked halls to the crypt of the keepers. As they entered, Asmer's presence manifested directly above them, a vast, swirling black cloud that seemed to swallow the moonlight. Mortal. The Valerius. You have chosen a terrible end. Asmer's voice boomed in their minds, a chilling, disembodied sound that resonated with cosmic power. Your bride, the lock, will suffer for eternity in agonizing stasis. Choose me. Asmer focused his immense psychic force on Liam, showing him a tempting vision. A vision of Liam Valerius restored to his old life, his name back, Seraphina now a loving, mortal woman, their future full of simple, fleeting happiness. Choose the shadow. Become the keeper. I will free her from the lock. She will be mortal. You will have your human life. All you sacrificed restored. It was the ultimate temptation, the return to normalcy, the gift of mortality to the woman he loved. Liam staggered under the psychic assault, his heart aching for the simple life he could never have. But then he felt Seraphina's resolve, her acceptance of the eternal sacrifice, through the bond. Her love was for his soul, not his name. Liam threw the obsidian dagger at the ground, shattering Asmer's illusion. My name is Liam Drake, he roared, his voice trembling but defiant. My choice is her freedom. Not my comfort. Seraphina moved swiftly to the moon altar, bathing in the faint moonlight that still managed to penetrate Asmer's darkness. She lay upon the obsidian slab, the ancient runes glowing beneath her. The time is now, my anchor, she commanded, opening her soul, her mind, her essence, to him through the bond. The final step required a physical representation of the lock and key merging. Seraphina, her face serene, pulled Liam toward her. The lock is open, she whispered, her eyes shining with love and sorrow. Enter the prison, Liam. She guided his mouth to her neck, directly over her carotid artery. It was the same spot where, in the thumbnail, she would one day refuse to drink his blood, believing it would kill him. But now it was a vow of eternal fusion. Liam leaned in, not with hunger but with absolute surrender. He didn't break her skin. Instead, he pressed his lips gently against her pulse point, channeling all the energy of the living key, the silver power of the rune, into her. The contact was a blinding surge of energy. Seraphina cried out, not in pain but in profound, terrifying completion. The rune on Liam's chest detached itself, rushing like liquid silver light and sinking deep into Seraphina's body. The living lock and the living key merged. Asmer, sensing the ultimate fusion, the permanent jail being constructed, shrieked a sound of pure cosmic agony. He lunged downward but it was too late. The silver light consumed Seraphina and Liam. They were enveloped in a cocoon of covenant power, the perfect, unyielding prison. When the light faded, Shadow King Azmar was gone, not defeated but locked away, trapped within the permanent, bound souls of Liam Drake and Seraphina, keeper of the balance. They lay together on the altar, exhausted, intertwined. The bond of empathy was now an eternal fusion. Their thoughts, feelings, and very existence merged into one, two beings who had become the world's unbreakable prison. The refusal had been reversed, not by bloodlust but by love's final sacrifice. The moon altar was cold when Liam Drake and Seraphina woke. They were no longer simply lying next to each other, their souls were intertwined. Liam's first realization was the intense, familiar cold radiating from Seraphina, yet it felt like his own cold. Simultaneously, Seraphina felt the rhythmic, gentle thrum of Liam's heart, a sensation that now beat inside her own consciousness. They sat up looking at each other. They were physically separate, yet the invisible chain of the eternal fusion was absolute. Liam stood and walked toward the crypt's entrance. Seraphina immediately felt a tug, a gentle, psychic pull that warned her of the distance. It wasn't pain but a deep, instinctive aloneness. Liam realized that his greatest sacrifice was not his name or his mortality, but his right to despair. He had to be eternally strong, eternally anchored for the sake of the world. As the new day broke, Ilara and the remaining Drake Coven returned to the crypt. They found Seraphina and Liam standing together, their closeness unnerving, yet radiating an undeniable power. Ilara immediately sensed the change. "The fusion," she breathed. "It's complete. You are the guardians of the balance." The Coven elders, though cautious, saw their queen stable, their threat neutralized and their kingdom secure. They bowed low, accepting the new, complex order. Seraphina, standing tall with Liam at her side, addressed her people. Lord Cayen's tyranny stemmed from fear of losing power, fear of change, fear of the mortal, she declared, her voice echoing in the crypt. That fear led him to attempt to create the Shadow Keeper, and ultimately, led to his doom. She laid down the final rule of the Drake Coven. 1. The embrace of choice. The covenant is sealed by choice, not by blood. Love and free will are the covenant's greatest strength. 2. The rejection of thirst, bloodlust and the random hunting of mortals are forbidden. The anchor, Liam, is the sustenance, and the coven must live in balanced coexistence with the mortal world. 3. The acceptance of the anchor. Liam Drake is the co-ruler, the eternal anchor. His life, his rhythm and his hope are essential to the coven's survival. Any threat to the anchor is a threat to the lock, and thus, a threat to all of existence. That evening in their chamber, Liam looked at Seraphina, who was sketching a complex, silver rune, the fusion symbol, on a piece of parchment. The price of eternity was high, it was the loss of individual freedom. But in that absolute fusion, they found a love deeper and more secure than any mortal or immortal could ever achieve. The vampire who refused to drink his blood had ultimately given up her entire identity to be forever bound to him. The old, cold stone of Castle Drake no longer felt like a tomb. It felt like a home humming with a new, stabilized energy. 5 years had passed since Shadow King Azmar was sealed within the eternal fusion of Liam Drake and Seraphina. The Drake Coven had thrived under the rule of its guardians of the balance, accepting the final rule that prioritized choice and coexistence over bloodlust. Liam walked through the courtyard, the sounds of the night no longer overwhelming, but a rhythmic soundtrack to his existence. He was eternal now, his aging slowed to a crawl, his mind sharp, but his essence remained firmly anchored in the mortal perspective. His heart still beat, a steady, strong rhythm that Seraphina constantly felt. Seraphina was waiting in the great hall. She no longer had to search for him, she simply followed the constant thrum of his being that pulsed within her own mind. Their eternal fusion was a life lived without secrets. They communicated often without speaking, sharing thoughts, anxieties, and small bursts of profound joy. If Liam felt a flash of frustration during a council meeting, Seraphina instantly felt a wave of tension and would subtly intervene. If Seraphina felt the centuries of melancholic loss bubble up, Liam's mind would immediately radiate anchor hope, a comforting, persistent warmth that drove the sadness away. The only physical boundary remaining was the one they had chosen. They lived near each other, yet still respected the space of the other's will. The monthly ritual to replenish Liam's fragment of longevity had evolved into a sacred act of intimacy. It was the moment the core of their original dilemma, the refusal to drink blood, was completely and utterly reversed by choice. One moonlit night, they were in their chamber. Seraphina prepared the silver-infused liquid, the single drop of her own blood diluted in water, necessary to maintain the lock's integrity. Liam stood before her, not as a source of temptation, but as a willing participant in their eternal pact. Liam took the basin, but instead of drinking immediately, he set it down. He walked to Seraphina, pulling her close. He looked into her eyes, which were now a mix of vibrant amethyst and a deep, empathetic human warmth. "The covenant was sealed with a lie," Liam murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "But our life is sealed with this." He leaned down, not to her neck, but to her lips. He kissed her deeply, a long, consuming embrace. As the kiss deepened, Liam took the basin and, keeping their lips locked, he slowly drank the silver liquid. The act was a profound union, not blood taken in hunger, but life exchanged in love. As the infusion hit him, a surge of energy flowed from Liam through the bond and into Seraphina, stabilizing the lock. The transfer was complete. Seraphina pulled back, her eyes shining with absolute love and relief. "You once refused to drink my blood even when I was dying," Liam recalled, his thumb brushing her cheek. "Because the cost was your soul and my sanity," Seraphina finished. "But now, my love, my vampire bride refused to drink my blood, until I was dying, and now she chooses to give me her life to keep us both eternal." This ritual became the ultimate expression of their bond, the final, intimate closure to the story's initial tension. Elara, now an imposing, influential figure, regularly traveled between Castle Drake and the mortal world. She acted as the ambassador of the balance, ensuring that the remaining Valerius allies and the human governments understood the new, stable order. She was the sentinel guarding the external borders of their peace. One day, Elara arrived with news that perturbed even the serene Seraphina. Reports of sudden, inexplicable mass paranoia and distrust were sweeping across the human towns nearest to the castle. "Ya Asmer ki nishani hai," Seraphina stated, her mind immediately focusing on the lock. "He cannot escape, but he can project his chaotic energy, the energy of absolute doubt, to weaken the human world's faith in the balance." "We are the lock, Sarah," Liam reminded her, his hand resting on the silver-inscribed fusion symbol she wore on a chain. "The outside world cannot break us." "Lekin hamar andar ki denaya?" Seraphina questioned, a strange, profound anxiety crossing her face. That night, Liam was sleeping, his mortal rhythm maintaining the lock's integrity. Seraphina was in a meditative state, monitoring the subtle pressure of Asmer's eternal imprisonment. Suddenly, a massive chilling wave of alien memory slammed into their shared consciousness. It wasn't Asmer's terror, it was a memory that felt like Liam's, yet was utterly foreign. Seraphina opened her eyes, gasping. She felt Liam's peaceful sleep rhythm instantly destabilize, and the lock trembled. She realized that when Asmer was sealed, he didn't just disappear. He used his final cunning will to inject a piece of Liam's former Valerius identity, a shattered fragment of mortal history, deep within the lock. The fragment was the memory of a past Valerius keeper who had tried to betray the Covenant for a forbidden source of power. Asmer's goal was simple: to make Liam, the anchor, believe that his own essence is tainted by betrayal. If Liam loses faith in his choice of sacrifice, his willpower will crack, and the lock will shatter from the inside. Liam woke abruptly, clutching his head, his face pale with unfamiliar fear. I had a nightmare," Liam whispered, his voice trembling. "I saw myself betraying you. Destroying the Covenant." Seraphina pulled him close, her own fear a cold knot in her chest. She had sealed Asmer, but Asmer had left a bomb within the prison, a shattered memory designed to destroy Liam's anchor hope. "It was Asmer, Liam," Seraphina said, holding him tight. "He cannot escape, but he can make you want to leave. He has given you the gift of doubt." Liam looked into her eyes, the warmth of the eternal fusion battling the cold projection of the past. "Then we must be stronger than a memory, my eternal. We must prove that choice is stronger than destiny." The final resolution of their love was complete. They were safe from the world, but their eternal life was now a constant battle against the memory of a lie. The endless watch had begun, a story that would continue until the last sun set.